All right. It's a pleasure to be here on the Minded podcast. My name is Fabian Oefner. I'm born in Switzerland, working in the US, and I create art that is at the intersection of science and art. And I always wonder what is time and what is reality, what is our perception of reality, and that carries throughout my work. So this is the Minded podcast.
Fabian, you have beautifully captured like scientific phenomena, but where do you draw the line between documenting science and creating art? How do you ensure your work doesn't simply become scientific illustration, but remains rooted in personal or even artistic expression?
Oh, that's a great question. To be honest, for me, there is no line. There is no clear distinction between what is scientific illustration and what is art. I think that's ultimately for the viewer of my art to decide whether it is art. I get a lot of comments that are actually going in this direction of like, this is no longer art, this is just science. But to me, it never mattered. I'm just a very curious person. I want to know about science. I want to know about chemistry. I want to know about biology, physics, etc., etc. And I just use the tools of art to explore these fields. What the outcome eventually is, whether it's art or just a research project, is not that important to me. I just find the joy of finding something out about this beautiful world we live in.
Does it bother you when people are having this conversation about, as you mentioned, what is art and what's not? What the line?
No,
What is the
I think
line?
it's actually fantastic because that pushes again the boundaries of what art can be. Because if you don't ask the question of what art can be in the first place, then you never find like a proper way of defining it. And I mean, at the end of the day, there is no way of defining art. It's something different to each one, and that's the beauty of it, right? Somebody's touched by something that has a scientific background, whether it's my black hole series or the disintegrating series. Someone maybe look at it from a very technical point of view, and somebody else says just this is aesthetically pleasing, or it moves me in a certain way. So again, it's the beauty of it. Once it leaves my studio, it becomes whatever it should become to that person that's looking at it.
And I think that's the beauty of it because as you said it earlier, how can we define art? What it really is. But at the same time, when we take a scientific approach, there's a definition, there's an end
Mm-hmm.
result, there's data being collected. So it's a conflict of interest happening right there in front of us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that is true. If I look at kind of my role models, if you want to say so, in art, I would say it's Leonardo da Vinci, because not that I have obviously not his talents or all of that, but kind of the process for him was very similar in the sense that he was just very curious about his environment. And it was not so much about creating something beautiful or something artistic. It was really just a way of exploring the world through different ways. In his case, painting, engineering, drawing. He had all kind of these different talents, but at the end of the day, it was all to him. It was all about trying to understand the world a bit more fully, a bit more deeply. And I think that's the same kind of force that motivates me to create my work, whether you want to call it art or not. But it's just curiosity. That's kind of the base layer that carries through all my projects.
Do you think your projects and work like yours can help people digest some more complex concept of science that sometimes is hard for people who's not very familiar with it to understand, but when there's a visual element to it, it's easier to connect?
Yeah, I think that's a valid point. I often hear people say like, for example, I didn't like physics in school, but when I look at your projects, it makes it a bit more easily to digest. And I think that's again the beauty of it. It's a different approach to these scientific topics. Like a lot of people are like think more visually than they think in terms of abstract numbers or figures. And so those kind of people, me being one of them, it certainly helps to understand the world a bit better. Yeah.
What is the driving force for you? Sometimes it is the science that you want to play with and then find a way to express that through your art, or perhaps it's an artistic vision that you have, then you want to find science that matches well with that?
Good question. I think it can be both. If you look at the disintegrating images, the ones of the cars disintegrating, that one started more as like an artistic vision of stopping a moment in time that was never really there, that is just artificial. And so there it was more like creating that visually and then kind of writing the science behind it, almost in a way of explaining what I'm trying to say with this image. And then in other projects, it's the opposite way. Like, for example, this year we had these fabulous displays of the Northern Lights that were visible throughout most of the US, for example. And that got me started with a project where I'm rebuilding a little vacuum chamber, where you can simulate the Northern Lights. And this was researched in the 19th century by a Norwegian scientist, and he kind of built these chambers. And so in that case, it's very much like coming from the scientific side and then creating or trying to find an artistic outlet in a way. So it goes both ways.
We often talk here about limitations. So sometimes how that can give you create opportunities when you have parameters to work with. And very much so, your work seems to be very based on scientific elements as well. So you have to find a way to be creative and express that way. Do you feel like because you already have those parameters in place, it is easier for you to concede and immerse in yourself and develop what you wanted to see? Or that just makes it far more challenging to really being able to convey your vision?
Um, I think sometimes because I'm very curious, even though I have these limitations of a certain project, I kind of dabble in too many things at the same time. So it's sometimes hard for me to focus on something. I was just talking to you about this Northern Lights project, and at the same time, I have 4 other things going where I'm trying to figure out what is time and how can we visualize it in 3 dimensions and all these things. So it's always like the big topics, and it kind of makes it hard sometimes to really focus on something and kind of accept the limitations of one project when you could just go to the next one where the limitations are different again. So sometimes it takes a bit of self-restraint to really delve into something and get to the bottom of it.
Yeah, you're switching gears, right, between projects and research and all of that. That I'm sure it requires quite a bit of it. So tell me how that works for you, like personally in a daily day. Like you have, I'm sure you have deadlines, like many artists with
Right.
exhibitions and projects that you need to meet. But at the same time, how far in advance are you planning future projects?
Um, with the bigger projects, it can be 1 or 2 years in advance. What I'm trying to do is always reserve some time during the week where I can just play and I can just do something where I don't have any deadlines or any worries about whether it even turns into something of an output, whether it's a photograph or sculpture or whatnot. It's really just, in a way, it's in science, you would call that basic research, where you're just trying to understand something a bit more fully, which then maybe leads to a project, maybe leads to a sculpture, but oftentimes it's just research and it just ends there. And it was just for the pleasure of my own sake of researching something, understanding something a bit better.
You have mentioned that destruction and creation go hand in hand in your work. How does this philosophy extend beyond your art into your life and your worldview?
Um, Again, good question. Oftentimes, I would say that the art that I do is kind of my life, right? It's kind of an extension of my life. So I wouldn't say that in my private life I'm a very destructive person, or that I apply those things of disintegrating. Luckily, I try to be somewhat stable there. But really, then those concepts of like breaking things down and rebuilding them is really, it permeates the art that I do.
Do you find hard to turn off your brain sometimes? Sometimes there's so many ideas and things that you want to explore, or you're so invested in a project and in research.
Oh,
Is
absolutely,
it
absolutely.
is it hard to find those quiet moments to kind of just breathe?
Absolutely. That's probably a question that a lot of artists would answer with yes. It is hard because you're always short on time and always have too many ideas of what you want to do. So very much so, very much so.
Has and it is quite hard, as you just mentioned, but has it got any easier throughout the years as you become more mature, more invested within your work, and you perhaps more proficient with what you're doing? Or no, it's still just as chaotic and crazy in your head as it was when you began?
I guess it would be bad if it was that case. I think I've become a bit more methodical over the years. But nonetheless, I think it's also that struggle sometimes that leads to great ideas or outcomes. If you do wrestle with an idea and it doesn't let you go, and you're really invested in it, and you cannot just stop thinking about it, it just after a while it does lead to something amazing. So you always, in a way, also have to embrace the chaos a little bit and not just try to be too structured. Again, it's like a balance, right?
Yeah. Do you pay attention to what's going on in our market, in not so much in terms of prices and what's going on what's selling, but perhaps what are people exploring? I'll give an example. If you find out someone is exploring a subject that you are interested in, will you still kind of do your own spin and version of that, or you perhaps to go pursue something else that is more unknown?
Oh, okay. Yeah, I think what is interesting, I don't necessarily pursue other ideas that other artists have. What I did notice over the years is that oftentimes there are similar concepts and ideas that all of a sudden seem to like materialize, and then all of a sudden you have different artists working on kind of a similar idea. For example, in my case with Daniel Arsham, who also to a certain extent tries to understand a bit better what time is and the perception of reality. And even though we've never spoken directly with each other, it's just interesting to see that we have similar concepts that we're working on. But the outcome, again, the results, the photographs, the sculptures, they're quite different in a way. So rather than saying like, oh man, this is like somebody else is working on that as well, like maybe I should change what I'm working on, I try to embrace it and say like I'm on the right track because I feel like I'm not the only one with these questions. So that's kind of the beauty of it. It's kind of all interwoven a little bit, almost like a neural set of mushrooms throughout the forest. And even though they're somewhat not connected, in a way, they're all connected and working on the same thing.
If you were trying to explain the best of your knowledge what time is, how would you do it?
I think I would do it through my art. I think the disintegrating photographs are the ones where I stop time literally by doing high speed photography. I think those come to the closest to understanding what time is. It's everything that I give you verbally falls short of what time is.
And what about reality?
You're asking tough questions, Yuri.
I know. I was so excited to have you because I'm like, oh, we can go some to like the rabbit hole here, go down to the nitty gritty. I'm not sure. Again, listen, everybody, we're not gonna find the solutions to all the problems in the world today, but we're fun. We can explore and see where we go.
Right. Yeah. No, that is true. I think reality can be defined in so many different ways, right? There is the perception of each individual of their own reality. And I think there's the scientific concept of reality of, the space around us, the planets that are revolving around the sun, etc., etc. So again, you have like so many different ways of how you can approach what reality is. I think in my work, it's more about the physical world around us, like almost again, like the scientific approach. How do we know that what we live in is actually real? And that it's the things we can touch, this table that this laptop is sitting on is actually there. So things like things like that.
So the future ideas and it's in your mind perhaps is not quite real yet, but if we see time as a linear, non-linear thing, and then it's already
Mm.
happened some point in time in a different reality.
Yeah, for example, see, and that gives me a beautiful insight into how you would define time. And again, it's interesting to see how that is rubbing off other ideas. So I actually have this conversation with quite a few people. I was like, hey, what do you think time is? And you always get different answers. And that inspires me then to create the next thing.
Lovely. Well, one of the reasons I want to ask about those questions, it has some sort of a definition and idea because we're living in a world with a lot of fake news and digital manipulation and so on.
Mm-hmm.
So what truth really is, right? How do we
Mm-hmm.
view truth in reality? And
Right.
I'm curious to know for you, when you see all the transformation, how things are moving along so quickly on that aspect that
Mm-hmm.
I think AI has become a big part not only in our world but in our world in general. How the next generation can perceive truth to be, what's the best way to connect with that?
Okay. Okay. So you're kind of asking how you think the transformation of the AI is altering the way we see truth, or
How we can perceive it, right? The possibility of truth, and also not only AI in art, but also fake news, how the rhetorics, the communication, how people are using tools to push the reality closer towards to their own agenda
okay,
instead of finding your true north, right? What really real to you. When
yeah,
you have all those places that are telling you this is how it's supposed to look or supposed to be, there's it's hard to kind of to figure it out where you stand.
that is true. I'm wondering if it is art that is supposed to tell us then what is truth. Like art, I find can mostly ask questions, but not so much answer questions. So in my case, for example, if somebody looks at the work of Disintegrating, um, it has an element of dishonesty about it in a way that it is a moment that never really existed, and yet it's there in front of you. So that kind of makes the person then ask, yeah, so what is actually a moment in time? How do you define that? What are the elements that make a moment real? And by looking at it, in this case, this integrating image, you are perceiving to see a real moment because all the elements are there. It looks like from your collective set of images you have in your mind. If you see something frozen like that, you ultimately conclude that this is a real scientific moment that is frozen in time. Whether it's like a bullet going through something or a drop of water falling into a surface and it creates that splash. You have those images in mind when you look at the disintegrating photograph, and you're trying to apply those same kind of set of scientific facts to that image, and then you realize, wait a minute, this can't be real. This is not real. So this kind of makes you ask then the question, okay, so how do I define reality? How do I define time? But the image doesn't necessarily give you an answer to what time is. It just gives you an opportunity to ask yourself the question: what is time for you? What is reality to you? How do you define
I love it. So in search of truth, we're not seeking for answers but to the right questions.
it? Yeah, exactly. Well put.
Love it. uh, Now, a little bit going back about time because I'm curious about your opinion because you're someone who spent time not only creating ways to explain it, but also, really what it is. What do you think it's a relation? What do you think is society is missing in its relationship with time in general?
I think it's something you mentioned before about the things accelerating, going faster and faster. And I think to a certain extent, again, my work is maybe a bit of a reaction to that. But the fact that I stop time, it's also in a way a longing for slowing down things, right? And so looking maybe at one of those photographs gives you also a kind of comfort that you're looking at a moment, it's frozen, it's not moving at all, and you can look at all the different elements and analyze it. Because that's really what we're lacking today, right? We have so many distractions from all different sides, and it is hard for us to really focus and maybe, pause for a moment and really maybe just cherish a moment that we're experiencing, or just, not having to worry about something for 5 minutes and really just be in the moment. That's something we, I think, struggle with.
I'll give you an example now and ask this question. If I have this cue thing that sometimes it doesn't matter where I am, if I see a butterfly, that kind of grounds me immediately. It gets me to stop whatever I'm thinking to kind of enjoy the moment. For whatever reason, has always been a positive trigger for me, right? If doesn't matter part of the world, is when I stop and I breathe and I look around and I kind of feel the grass and I can feel the breeze. Do you have something like this for you? Something that kind of triggers you to kind of immediately find yourself centered and grounded in a moment?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I grew up in the Swiss mountains. So whenever I am in a place where I see mountains, I see maybe a glacier come down the mountain, it's such a comforting sight. And it grounds me.
You have your hands in both worlds, right? In scientific world, but also as an artist. What misconceptions do you think each field has about the other?
Good question. I think it's a misconception that artists are not scientists and that scientists are not artists. Because yes, that's correct. And with science, you're basing your findings on facts, and with art, it's more an emotional reaction to the world. But if you don't have an artistic, if you don't have artistic thinking, creative thinking in science, what you're looking at are always going to be just figures and numbers, and you don't see the bigger concept behind it. And I think with art, to a certain extent as well, if you don't use, if you want to say, so the right side of your brain as well, and you apply certain techniques, certain methodology to it that is maybe rooted more in the scientific field, then you're also going to be struggling to create something meaningful. So I think it's, at the end of the day, what I really think is that both artists and scientists are much closer actually than a lot of them think. Maybe they express themselves differently, and maybe listening to an artist can be a bit more, maybe exciting, or looking at a painting can be a bit more touching. But at the same time, I think scientists try to do exactly the same. They try to understand the world a bit better. And even though the outcome, reading a paper is maybe a bit less exciting at first sight, it is just as deep and as meaningful to understand the world. So that's why I'm always struggling to see the distinction between an artist and a scientist, because to me, it's really the same, just with a different output.
How do you describe creativity? Perhaps we even, before we even go there, do you believe that creativity or an artistic vision can be taught? It is something that people are born with, or something that can be practiced and you can be improved upon?
I would say it's the latter that you mentioned. I think each and every person has an artistic vision that they're born with, and you can certainly bring that out more, depending on what you end up trying to, or what you end up wanting to do with your life. Maybe your idea of having a creative outlet is art. Maybe it's being a brilliant physicist. Maybe it's being a chef, maybe a musician. But I think each person, I've never met a person in my life that I would say has zero creativity. It is true with some, it's a bit more difficult to see, Obviously, when you see an artist, you automatically assume, okay, that person must be creative because you see the outcome a bit. With another person, it's maybe a bit more subtle. If you have somebody that's really good with social interaction and is really smooth with that and can pick up on little things in other people's feelings, that to me is also a creative output in a way that that person can understand that better and know what to do with that, much like an artist is really good at when he maybe has his paint, he knows exactly what to do with that. But at the end of the day, these are all different forms of creativity, and I'm not saying one or the other is less. They're all just equally beautiful.
Yeah, because if you think about the necessity to express oneself is with us since we were born, even through speaking, or even if you give an instrument to any kid in the world, something's going to come out of it, even a blank piece of paper. We don't know what's going to get out, but there's some sort of way to use the colors, the shapes, and express themselves. And that's the combination, how you said it before. Perhaps we all have it with us. Some has ability to touch into them more often or has practiced it more often. So it is easier to tap into that. Now, is that a source for it? I know we talk sometimes with a few people that go a little bit deep in the aspect that perhaps there's a, um, I don't want to say like a infinite universe or something that kind of you can
Mm-hmm.
tap into those source to find inspiration and to find moments of intuition.
Mm-hmm.
We always hear about great scientific breakthrough happens sometimes in a flash of a moment. Was just your mind was just exploring something else. Do you think is that an element that goes perhaps quite we don't fully comprehend it yet that we are tapping into something more than just our physical element?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting what you mentioned before about if you give an instrument to a kid or a piece of paper and some pencils and something astonishing comes out. And I think kids especially have that connection where they just have this creative outlet without thinking too much. And once we get older, it's a bit harder for us to tap into that. But I think it's all there for us. There is definitely a force that we're tapping into that we're not really fully understanding. That's again another mystery, right? What is really creativity, and why have certain people seem to have so much of it, others have a bit less, etc., or are less able to tap into that. But it's a fascinating question.
Do you have a routine in terms of before you begin your day? Like today, for example, is going to be a day that you're going to be heavily invested, let's say, for example, on creating something, a project that you're working on. Is it perhaps, coffee first in the morning, perhaps some music that puts you in the right spot? I notice a lot of your Instagram posts follow a lot of classical music,
Mm-hmm.
like very very seduced and very inspirational. And I wonder if that translates to you in your life, and if you have any sort of like routines that get you in that right state of mind to be able to be your most effective.
Yeah. It's a great observation with the classical music because that's a source of inspiration that I have where I can tap into that creativity of other people. In this case, these incredible composers, the music that is just so touching, and it inspires me to trying to create something that is as meaningful as some of these compositions that I listen to. So that's definitely a source of inspiration. Yeah. I wouldn't call it like a routine. I'm not necessarily now listening to half an hour of classical music before and then, 3, 2, 1, go. It's more like it's kind of, it starts to kind of wave together, and all of a sudden I'm able to create something that I could not create without having that inspiration.
Yeah. Now it's an interesting. Everybody has their own methods to accomplish certain things. What was you like growing up as a kid? Were you always a curious kid? Were you always someone like digging in and trying to get answers? Tell me a little
Yeah.
bit about your upbringing.
Um, I grew up very fortunate in a way that I had two parents that are both very loving and both really trying to convey to their kids that the world is a beautiful place with a lot of wonderful things to explore. My dad would, take us to the forest and show us the different plants, and we would build tree huts and things like that. And from my mom's side, she was more like the classic artist. She would paint, and I think that's where I got that artistic side from. But really, what was that? The foundation of it is really thinking that the world is worth exploring, and there's a lot of hidden gems in it if you do that. And in that sense, I was a very curious kid, which was not always to the liking of my parents, because I remember I would take over entire rooms to start building things in them. When I was a teenager, I decided to build a telescope. And to build a telescope, you have to polish the mirror, and you use like pitch from trees, which is a terrible material to work with. And I remember ruining my parents' bathtub because I was, polishing the mirror in the bathtub. And it was like, it was not, if you have a kid that is very curious and creative, it's not always to the best of the furniture or, the general architecture of the house you grow up in.
In terms of personality, do you think you're more like your dad or your mom?
I would say I'm a mix of both. Again, I guess the tinkering mind of my dad and the artistic output of my mom both play a role in what Fabian does these days.
That's funny. So I have two kids, and when they were going through those horrible chews, I used to say that one of them was the worst of both of us, me and my wife, like just the worst personality, worst characters of both of our personalities in one tiny 2-year old. But now that she's 11, and she's such an amazing kid, and she's like the best part of us, in beyond, plus whatever she is herself, right, in terms of her own person. So
It's
it's always
amazing.
interesting to go back to those days and see where the influence comes in. And as you mentioned before, to be so fortunate you have parents that encourage you to pursue
Mm-hmm.
those things. Are they still with us, your parents?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's nice to
So
still
they
have
have
them.
had chance to see your success. They have been able to see you accomplish. I'm sure they feel very proud. And have you had the time to have those conversations with them about, like things kind of worked out well?
That is true. Yes, fortunate enough to make a living out of it, but it shows that they're truly great parents because they don't care so much about my economic success or that side of it, but more so that I'm able to enjoy what I do and that I seem to be happy. So again, this goes to show that they're great parents.
You were mentioning earlier, we're talking about classical music. Do you play any instrument?
I do not, and I think that's why I use so many music or instruments in my work, because it's something that I deeply admire. If somebody has the ability to be creative that way, I'm simply not. I'm just really good at listening to music, but that's where the extent of my music talent goes.
We're in the same boat because listen, I'm not an artist. I don't play any instrument. I'm just very good at listening to people who are very good doing their job, like you. So and I and I
Yeah,
live
good at
through that.
asking
And
questions, I would say.
I'm an enthusiast, shall we say,
Yeah,
and in this world, and being able to connect with people who think differently and have different perspective and try to understand what is, adopt some of their ways they think and see the world with their own eyes. So that's the fascinating part of this gig right here.
it is amazing. I always like that word amateur, because today we perceive it as something negative when you say, "Oh,
Hmm.
he or she is an amateur at what they do." But really, the root word of it is to love somebody, from the French word to love something. And I think that's always like a key component in order to be just good at something, is to just love it. And even if people maybe call you an amateur, maybe, I mean, a lot of scientists would probably call me an amateur because I'm just dabbling in science but don't really know what's going on. But doesn't really matter because I just really love science and I like to understand it better.
And you become a vessel to those studies, a vessel to communicate to a broader audience something that it's beyond that you're interested in, that also has connected with other people's work, and it becomes almost like an ecosystem, right,
Yeah,
of information, science, and art, and curiosity, and things that make us uh wow and be excited about life. So it's all
yeah,
good.
it's very true. Yeah, we don't have to overthink it too much.
Now, is that a specific? I mean, you're already dealing with such big themes like time and reality. I mean, just it's so difficult to express and comprehend. Are there other topics, subjects that you want to explore, or at least try to get a crack at it?
I'm pretty good with these two.
Yeah, I
I
was
think
gonna say he might take a
they're
lifetime.
I think I would be
People's
good
been
with
trying to
one. It's
explain
like,
that for
yeah,
a
it's
few
just
centuries
like,
now,
yeah,
or even millennials if you go to ancient Greek and.
yeah, that's true. So yeah, no,
uh,
I'm gonna stick to those two. It's good enough for
um,
me.
Fabian, before I let you go, there are three questions. And you mentioned before that you were listening to the Felipe Pantoni
Mhm.
episode, and ask everybody. So you might know which ones they are. I needed to recommend us a few things: a book, something to read. Can be one of your favorites. It can be something you read recently. Either way, um, something to watch: a movie, TV show, documentary, perhaps something to listen because we were talking about music earlier. And last but not least, our next guest. Who should we invite to be here at the podcast next?
Okay, good questions. What was the first one?
To read.
Something to read. I mentioned Da Vinci earlier, and that biography by the name escapes me right now. He wrote the same book recently, biography about Steve Jobs, and he wrote one about Einstein as well, yes, and then also Da Vinci. But the Da Vinci one especially, not only because the life that he had was amazing, but also it shows that he wasn't supernatural, but rather that he was a person like you and me. But then the book really shows where it was different, where he was different, and how we can foster that in our own lives. So I really recommend this book, Leonardo da Vinci, the biography. That's the
All
first
right.
one. Something
Uh,
to
to watch.
something to watch. There's a lot of things to watch. Something that I just cannot get enough of, and something you mentioned with the butterfly is just the Planet Earth series from BBC. It's just like every time I watch this, I think I should get out of these four walls and go out and explore the world because there's just so much more to see when you're outside. And
Yes.
so that one's just gorgeous to look at. Something to listen to if you're if you have never heard this, the Richard Wagner, very controversial composer, and yet he wrote some incredible music. And one of his favorite pieces of mine is Lohengrin, an opera, and there's an introduction, a prelude, 7-minute prelude, and I think it's one of the most beautiful pieces of music ever written. It feels like you can really. It's so beautiful. I cannot find the words to describe it. So please just listen to it. And then
And
lastly, somebody else to have on the show,
yes.
um, Hiroshi Sugimoto, a
Mm.
Japanese photographer who deals a lot with time as well. Um, and I would have another guest with him, Leandro Ehrlich, who's an Argentinian sculptor, brilliant mind, and also, from what I've heard, pretty funny. And I think the two of them, they both have a great sense of humor and make fantastic art. I think that would be a beautiful dual episode.
Oh, that would be lovely. Well, perhaps we can try to work on that one for sure.
And please
Uh,
do.
yeah, Fabian, I have to say, again, we got to talk. I got the chance to meet and talk to a lot of great people, but I was specifically excited about this one because the topic, and not often I got to really dive deep in some of those topics that I'm very interested in, and I'm sure, hopefully, we'll have opportunity to do this again, perhaps in person, and we can
Please.
enjoy ourselves, with a few hours ahead of us because we can go very deep in a rabbit hole and continue this conversation. Because at the end of the day, things like this and an ability to express yourself and to share ideas and to learn new things is one of the great joys in life in being able to explore somebody else's world. So I want to thank you so much for joining us. I really had a great time. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Yuri. Your questions are really, really good to get me thinking about my own work. So it's truly valuable to spend some time with you, and hope we get to do that in person. And I can let you do some of the stuff here at the studio and have fun, have fun with some of the installations here when you stop by.
Excellent. Thanks again, man. Have a great day.
You too. All right. Cheers.
All right, we're done.